Hello and welcome to the CXUX Leadership Forum channel and brand marketing. My name is Michael with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. And for those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us on Twitter at ArgyleExecForum. Also, be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I'd like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we've set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now let's get started. Without further delay, I would like to introduce Mercer Smith, Vice President, CX Insights and Community with Partner Hero. We're excited to have Mercer for her opening keynote presentation titled Improving by Subtracting, Simplifying Your CX UX. Mercer, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome, and over to you.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today talking about how you can improve your CX by subtracting. So the universe seems to operate in a starvation mindset. More is better, big is better, and in business, the same goes. We're always trying to hunt for bigger and better deals, shinier products, more significant amounts of revenue. However, in CX, this constant hunger doesn't actually serve us. In CX, less is actually more. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The modern consumer faces 35,000 choices per day. I personally don't really like math, and that's such a huge number. While we may make some of those choices subconsciously, it's still a huge number of considerations every single day, and each of them takes a mental toll. So creating a smooth, frictionless customer experience takes on a little bit of the load from the busy minds of our consumers. In that regard, convenience is critical. In fact, 83% of consumers say convenience is an essential factor in their experience, especially if they're considering purchasing. The less they have to think about it, the better. Subtracting unneeded complexities from your customer experience creates a better journey for your engaged prospects and customers, and it also increases LTV and MRR, lifetime value and monthly recurring revenue. In this talk, I'll cover how customer experience professionals usually overcomplicate their CX strategy and how to subtract complications to add additional value. The best path to an excellent customer experience starts with knowing your audience, then moves towards prioritizing straightforward processes and clarifying your data. Let's break down what each of those looks like. We're going to start with knowing your audience. The mistake that people usually make is believing that personas are only an artifact of marketing. While marketing can be responsible for concepting and maintaining your personas, the whole business ultimately feels the impact. As a CX professional, you must understand the nuances of your different buyer personas. In fact, there's value in taking the personas created by your marketing team and adding context from the customer-facing side. For instance, you can add additional details about what types of support channels they prefer, the types of questions they usually ask, and how they usually use your product. In-depth knowledge of your personas facilitates you making more meaningful and well-prepared strategy plans for your customer-facing teams. You understand more about the emotional motivators for your customers and the types of questions that they usually need to solve. Use that knowledge to cut out any extraneous features or functionality that may distract rather than add. The next mistake people often make is using an everything but the kitchen sink strategy to encompass every potential customer need. You do not need to offer every single support channel to every single person. It's a lot, and it's usually not needed. That's actually a pretty contentious point, I'd imagine, but you probably know better than your customers what they actually need. Customers aren't paid to consider the best way to use your product or service. And with that also comes the knowledge of how specific subsets of people should use your product instead of others. Instead of offering everyone the same option, consider separating groups of users and catering experiences just to them. So for instance, users on a business tier plan may have access to different features than someone on a free version of your product. In that case, you shouldn't show content or support functions related to those features to free users. Also segment your documentation so that relevant content only shows to the people that need it. Imagine the confusion if someone comes to your documentation site looking for a certain feature and instead is served information about a bunch of things that they don't actually even have access to. Segmenting keeps the decision-making simple for your customers and means that they can focus specifically on getting the most use out of your product in the places where you need them to. The next mistake is often relying too heavily on the customer's perspective of their journey rather than considering what you want their journey to look like. Did you know that the city of Boston streets were built entirely around the most accessible paths for cows and horses to take to the market at the center of town? I don't know if you've ever driven in Boston, but it's pretty hectic. If you look at the roads of Boston and other cities like New York, there's a stark difference. In New York, the streets were designed for navigability, and the grid system makes the city easy to navigate and know what to expect. When you take the time to know the path that your customers take versus the course that you want them to take, you can shift your strategy to start pushing them in the right direction. I know there's tons of content about journey mapping coming today, so there will be more information about that from some of the other presenters. Ensure that you have data points when you are creating those journey maps from every team at the company, not just your customer experience teams. So speak with sales, speak with marketing, speak with product design, and understand where their touch points are with the customer, both ideally and in reality. Use tools like Full Story to gain an actual perspective on how people use your product. Use measurable data to inform the pathing that you create. The more actual data you aggregate and build into your customer journey mapping, the better and more informative it will actually be. Remember, customer journey mapping isn't just about understanding your customer's actions. It's also about crafting the ideal path for them to take. As much as I love New York, being born and raised there, in this case, you want to be a New York, not a Boston. Focus on building a journey that drives measurable business outcomes, balances automation, and adds meaningful human interaction. Lots of times people use jargon and proprietary language, without first educating your customers on what it means. Businesses think that it makes them seem knowledgeable, but fancy language actually alienates and confuses users if they don't have any context for it. Have you ever traveled to a place where you kind of spoke the language, but weren't 100% sure all of the time? You might have gone to a restaurant, gone to a business, tried your hand at understanding the native speaker, and maybe got 45% of the message. That's what can happen when we're talking to customers using vocabulary and functions that they need context for. While they might get some of the message, it's not going to be as impactful or meaningful as if they had a glossary or context for the words that you're using. You do not want your product pages or documentation to look like a buzzword ipsum paragraph. Instead of making your users do more work, simplify the language, use basic terminology and concepts. It also helps businesses that are localized in different geographic regions. Translating colloquialisms and proprietary product language across multiple different languages can really be tricky in those cases, especially if you're not using native speakers for your translation services. Also, try to reconsider your pricing. Many businesses assume that the more options you can offer for your customers, the better. They assume that if you can be more flexible with your pricing plans, more people will purchase from you. That's not necessarily true. Consider again the number of decisions that people must make daily. Are you adding more complexity unnecessarily? Do your customers need to spend extra thought power on which of your tiers they should buy? Or worse yet, do they need to spend additional cycles figuring out the differences or finding any information about your pricing and packaging? Keep your pricing and packaging as straightforward and easy to understand as possible. If you can, given your business practices, consider publicizing as much data about your pricing and packaging as you can. It's obviously more tenable for physical goods or SaaS companies, but even as a service provider, you can include pricing estimation tools that'll help your customers in their decision-making. Allow your customers to get as much information as they want or need on their own without needing to talk to anyone. Keep your packaging straightforward, easy to understand, and minimal to provide the best possible experience. After all, if someone needs to spend tons of time just figuring out how to buy your product, do you think they can be excited about using it? Varying prices based on loyalty, season, purchase location, channel, or other demographics can improve revenue and profits, but also adds unnecessary complexity to your process and creates a worse customer experience in some cases if it's not done well. The next step on the journey is learning to clarify your data. Oftentimes, people think that because your team, the customer-facing team, talks to customers day in and day out, they have a gut-deep understanding of what is good to prioritize or what's good to ignore. It's true. Your customer-facing teams do know your customers better than anybody else. But even with that bone-deep understanding, it's still essential to gut check any of your assumptions using data. Think of ways to automate the customer insight generation process rather than generating insights on a one-off basis, such as when a conversation comes through. Start by finding the data that'll be impactful and useful for moving your strategy forward. It could be information about feature requests, ticket volume, team efficacy metrics, or even cross-functional productivity measurements. Rather than letting yourself get distracted by all of the potential options, try to focus on the few that you think will be the most meaningful as you build your strategy. From there, make a place where all those insights live. Could be a dashboard, a web page, or even a TV that displays them in your office. Socialize the existence of this resource with everyone at your company and ensure that they know how the metrics impact their work. These insights allow you to keep your processes simple and that you can prioritize the 100% correct features that matter to your customers. Not taking the time to create a data lake, reporting dashboard, or connect your data sources because it'll take too much time or energy is something that I see tons of businesses making the mistake of. You also can sometimes see that they are assuming that there are bigger or more important things to do rather than getting your data in order. There is nothing more important than getting your data in order from the start. No customer should ever have to repeat themselves. No customer should ever be passed from one channel to another for support and reiterate their problem repeatedly. Not only is this not simple for the customer, it's also extremely complicated for your team. It's like a long game of telephone. Your customer starts with one message on one end, and when they finally end up with a support person that's going to help them, the message has become entirely distorted. That is, unless you've got good data. Ensure that you've got good tracking by using a CRM or help desk, and that any context is shared manually or automatically, ideally automatically. As soon as you introduce a human, mistakes start to crop up. That may look like requiring your customer-facing team members to write up notes after each interaction, but it could just as easily be an automated integration. Most of these products will offer APIs for connection, but if your team doesn't have the technical chops, you can always use Zapier to funnel your data into a Google Sheet or an Airtable. Creating context for your team members saves them and your customers time and energy. Again, I get it. We all want to offer our customers every possible option, but it's a huge mistake because it causes more strife than benefit, especially when it comes to the things that we think customers need versus what they actually need. It can be so tempting to offer everything in the shop to your customers. Imagine how good it would feel to say yes to every feature request and address every piece of customer feedback every time. On the other hand, imagine how chaotic that would be. There's no rhyme, no reason, and no real prioritization. Instead of just offering a little bit of everything, try understanding what your customers want and then prioritize. For example, study actual data about your customer base instead of assuming that your customers want live chat and text message support just because other companies are doing it. Use tagging, product analytics, data from your help desk, and user interviews to understand user priorities and rank them against your support strategy. Remember that you're never going to make everyone happy. Super hard for me to hear. I'm sure it's hard for you to hear too. There will always be at least one of your users upset about a choice that you've made, either in your product or within your customer-facing experience. Prioritize as many as possible while retaining alignment with your business forecasting. Lastly, ensure that you're doing something well before you begin prioritizing something else within your strategy. For instance, if you offer email support, but your response time is super high and your customers always talk about how terrible it is, it's probably not the time to add an additional channel. Focus on what you're already doing and make sure it's excellent, even if it feels painful in the moment. Assuming that the more metrics you track, the more information you'll have to work with is a big mistake. The fact is, the more metrics you track, the more easily distracted you are by numbers that might actually not be telling you anything. It's like when you go to a buffet and fill your plate with all of the food that it can hold, only to eat about 25% of it. You're distracted because everything looks so good that you don't end up focusing on the food that you enjoy or what actually nourishes you. As you go through your journey of simplification, keep tabs on which metrics work for your team and which may be extraneous. Be mindful of metrics that can just serve as glamour metrics too, or ones that could potentially incentivize problem behavior, like time to first response. Actively work to minimize the metrics that you are tracking. The fewer metrics you track, the more you correlate them, the easier it is to gain meaningful, intelligent insights about how you're performing. For instance, correlating average handle time to customer satisfaction or customer effort. You gain more from the two coupled together than you would from them individually. You do not need to track every metric in the book. Regularly evaluate what you are or aren't tracking and what you might be able to shift to do even better. Let's talk about prioritizing straightforward practices. We've already talked about knowing your customer. We've already talked about getting data. So let's see how we can marry those two together. Assuming that an expansive knowledge base and resources will give customers all the answers that they need is a very, very common mistake. In actuality, the more full a knowledge base is, the more difficult it can be to find what you want. Remember that example that I brought up earlier about people coming to your documentation site and finding information about features that they don't even have access to. To give another example, a stocked pantry is excellent. I love it. But without an amazing organization system, finding what you're looking for can be challenging. I think everyone knows that evening strife of trying to find the tomato sauce or something along those lines to make the meal and not being able to find it. You don't want that for your customers, and you don't want that for your knowledge bases. Instead of writing a bunch of material and expecting your customers to go hunting for it, bring the education to them. Show meaningful, helpful, or important content in the context where it's needed to create a more straightforward experience for your customers. For instance, if your customers are always having trouble moving through your sales process or on your account management page, consider adding an in-context chat on those pages or additional descriptions to information on the product pages to answer common questions. You'll often see these in a little form of bubbles with question marks on them that customers can click on. There are a few different methods of providing proactive support, and I've given some examples here, as well as the products that you can use to accomplish them. So for those little question mark bubbles that I just mentioned, in-app onboarding, you can use app queues, WalkMe, Pendo, or you could just look for in-app onboarding if you're currently using something for customer experience management. Email onboarding, such as MailChimp or Campaign Monitor. These are drip campaigns that come through whenever a customer signs up for your product or goes through an important milestone. In-context chat, such as using Drift or Intercom. This is great for sales pages, account management pages, making sure that someone is there right when the customer runs into trouble. Automated responses, instructional videos, evergreen resources, all those things are great in your knowledge base, but you need to make sure that you are serving them up contextually. Simplify your strategy by giving your customers a clear path to the answers they need. Not only does it reduce the number of tickets your customers have to send to get help, it also improves your recurring revenue and grants your team more time to work on impactful initiatives outside of the queue. Trying to solve for every possible customer issue ahead of time with complex multi-step internal processes. I'm looking at things like processing refunds or things like asking for product returns. Your internal processes affect your customers just as much as they affect your employees. Making convoluted, complex things makes it difficult for your team to respond and resolve issues. I just saw something about Frontier Airlines where they had added a entirely automated phone system where it took someone 15 minutes to get actual help and still was not able to speak to a human being. Using convoluted processes like this as a means to deflect can be helpful for your business, but doesn't necessarily provide the best customer experience. Here's an example of a standard process for issuing refunds. The customer reaches out for a refund, your team member receives the request, yada, yada, yada. This whole list, 7 steps. Wow, that's so much for something that could be straightforward. Maybe you already have this automated at your business, but many companies that I work with do not. Your team member ends up having to wait for a response. Your customer has to wait even longer. It's sloppy. Imagine if it looked like this instead. 4 steps. They reach out for a refund. Team member receives the request. They do it. They respond. It's amazing. Automate it. Take as many steps out of the process as you can. Build simple processes that show trust in your team members, which will almost always create a smoother, more straightforward experience for your customers. Blocking customers from reaching out to support by hiding contact information or your contact form. I see this all the time. People assume that if people can't find the contact form, they'll just go to the docs. It's not a great experience. We have to stop hiding ways for our customers to reach out to us, right? Don't try to hide your contact form. Just don't do it. If you really want to put a barrier before contacting you, use the proactive support that we discussed earlier. You can also use a tool like Solvi or something along those lines to surface documentation based on what the user typed in your contact form box. These are significant soft barriers that can give your customers pause before they reach out to you, but doesn't block them from reaching out altogether. Along with making it easy to find your contact form and reach out to your team, you should also make it easy and fast to get an answer once your customers contact you. One of the best ways to do this is to use automation, either in the form of AI or just building triggers directly into your help desk or CRM software. For example, you could set it so that anytime someone uses the word refund or password in an email, it automatically gets escalated to tier 2. This means that rather than waiting for someone to be assigned to the conversation and then manually assigning it to someone else after reading the content, the ticket gets to its intended recipient much faster. For some exchanges, like those related to passwords or refunds, even a minute can be a big deal. Your customer doesn't need to have a million bells and whistles to talk to you. A simple, straightforward contact form that is easy to find will often do the trick. AI. People are afraid of robots. I get it. Worrying that AI will create inhuman or disingenuous experiences and so not using it for anything is a huge mistake, and I see it often. I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. While I for sure won't recommend using an AI or bot for a customer in a tricky situation, using AI for routing, handling low-hanging fruit tickets, or even for light triage or information gathering is a great idea. Here are a few places that you could try to use AI. You raise the possibility for human error as soon as you introduce one of your agents into the mix. Using machines to do simple work narrows down the number of errors that can occur and allows your team to focus on their emotional strengths as humans. Beyond just the simplicity that AIs can lend to your processes, they make it easier for your customers. For instance, consider the use case of using a bot during chat. If you start a chat session by using a bot to gather information ahead of time, by the time a human being has worked their way through the queue and gets to your customer, they'll be able to get to a solution much more quickly. This simplifies the process for your customer and for your team. Everyone assumes that they need to handle everything on their own. I think this is just human nature. I do it all the time. But you don't need to do that for your customers to have a good experience. Human beings are tribal creatures, and we aren't meant to go about doing things alone. As corporations are made up of many humans, it might be slightly different, but there's still benefits to getting assistance with your support or customer success strategy. Using contractors or outsourcing to take care of some of the tasks assigned to your customer-facing teams can free up bandwidth to work on higher impact things. For instance, instead of answering tickets at your help desk, your support team could work on implementing an excellent AI or knowledge management strategy, or any of the things that we've talked about today. They could work on analyzing your support channels or customer data. They could work on implementing anything. Instead of trying to keep everything in-house, consider using a third party to help free up a little space for your team. It's amazing what you can do with a little bit of extra time, and consultants or BPOs can fulfill almost any role nowadays, from L&D to frontline support. Remember that, as with anything, simplifying your CX strategy is a work in progress. Not everything needs to be pared down to its bare bones for this to work. Instead of trying to burn everything to the ground, consider what is or isn't already working with your strategy and start there. If there's something that immediately comes to mind as problematic for your customers, that should be where your focus starts. Do not let perfection be the enemy of good. Thank you so much for listening to my talk today. I'm available on LinkedIn for more conversation. I also have a Calendly if you ever want to schedule time to talk. I'm truly an open book, so don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Mercer. This is an insightful presentation. And as a reminder, audience members, you can still enter questions. And we're now going to review some of the questions that came through. Okay, so our first question is one that I believe you touched on a bit earlier. And if you want to go a little bit deeper, that would be awesome. So the question is, we are struggling to simplify our CX, but we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen who all have things they want our experience to include. Do you have any advice for us?
Sure. CX is really exciting and it's definitely in the limelight right now. So I understand that there's probably tons of people that are really interested in what's going on. I think what I would try to do is look at what the impact is. So identify your North Star metrics for your business. So that's at the business level, and then consider it for your CX team. Once you figured those out, identify the priorities, probably 3 of them, that funnel up to those North Star metrics the most, and move forward with those. I'd be happy to talk more with you if you have like specific stuff. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. We could chat through. Biggest mistake companies have seen trying to make their experience easier for their customers. Again, I think the biggest thing is just like taking the buffet approach, right? So trying to offer everything all at once, every single channel, every single knowledge base article, all of that. There's too many decisions there, and it ends up first off being really difficult to maintain. A lot of companies rather don't have enough people to staff all those channels or maintain all of those knowledge base articles. The best way to get past it is, again, to kind of hone down. Your customers will understand if you say like, hey, we have to stop offering chat for XYZ reasons. Here are the best places where you can get support instead if you are looking for live support. Or making it easier to find other support channels in that event. So just as a recap, I'd say trying to offer everything is the biggest mistake. Everyone wants to do that. We all want to be super helpful. We all want customers to find the information that they need, but it's hard to maintain. So paring it down, starting with 1 or 2 things, and really practicing excellence at those is ultimately going to be the best way to move forward. How do I see the field of CX evolving over the next couple of years? Yeah, wow, this is a great question and something that I think a lot about. Businesses obviously are some of them are struggling in the economic downturn, right? And I think that CX is going to be a huge differentiator. I've been saying this for years, but I think now is where we're really starting to see the proof in the pudding, right? So it's easier than ever to create your own business. And I think the main differentiator is going to be how you treat your customers. Whether that be making sure that they get the responses that they need quickly, or just making your product experience delightful. You'll see people talking more about that on social media, sharing that with their friends. Word of mouth marketing is a big part of customer experience. I do also think that we're going to see a lot more decentralization of CX teams, right? Remote has been seeing a huge upsurgence since the pandemic. And I think that is going to pair really well with both working with BPOs or working with businesses like Oyster that allow you to hire in other countries without having entities there. So I think probably the biggest change that we're going to see is that decentralization, both in use of outsourced help, in making it more accessible to hire in other countries with companies that are helping with the legal and HR aspects of that. And then also probably with using AI. AI and NLP is getting super smart and can be really helpful for those first interactions that a customer has with a business, just to gather information. I always say, let the robots do what robots are going to do, which is get information, tag all of that, and then let your human beings lead with their heart and make for a truly awesome experience. I think those are all the questions that we have, Michael.
Thank you so much, Mercer. This was an excellent keynote, and we're always happy to have you with us. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. Now, this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Mercer, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.